Okay. Okay, let's go on. Let's go on with the next point. This has to do with his identity as a Jesuit. He is the first ever Jesuit Pope. And, 200, somewhere between 200 and 300 years ago, the Jesuits were suppressed by the Pope. And there's always been something of an uneasy relationship. He describes it as a tension, even within the Jesuit community. And a part of the reason for that is that most other religious communities tend to separate community and mission. That we have an identity as a community, and then we engage in some kind of work. For the Jesuits, there really is no separation like that. So their identity as a community is unfolded in a whole panoply, a whole variety of various missionary activities, seeking to have the flexibility to respond to whatever the particular need and situation is. They are not bound by a particular charism. They are bound, I won't say bound, they are supported by a particular method. And that is the spirituality of St. Ignatius and his own conversion experience and discernment that he kind of codified in what's called the spiritual exercises. And key to the spiritual exercises is putting yourself within the story of Jesus as found in the Gospels, throughout his life. Where are you there? Where are you in the story of Jesus? That, in a nutshell, really is the beginning of the methodology of the spiritual exercises. But it's not just sort of an imaginative play acting. It is bringing the story of Jesus into my life now, or maybe better, bringing my life now into the story of Jesus and see where God is working in my life. That's basically the heart of discernment. Ignatius is very, very strong in saying, one of the tools that God uses is your desires. Get in touch with your own desires, your deepest desires, not the superficial ones, not the winds of desire that carry you here and there, but here Jesus asking, what do you want? What would you have me do for you? And as we mentioned before, very often the immediate answer that comes to us needs to be refined. Because the immediate one is usually coming out of feeling, superficiality, whatever, which may be very valid, but we need to probe a little more deeply. So, he tells here the story of the development of his own vocation, and I'm not going to go into that a great deal, but it's interesting why he chose the Jesuits. He entered the diocesan seminary, but he liked the Dominicans. But he chose the Society of Jesus because he was an undisciplined person and needed discipline, and that's what the Jesuits were famous for. Now, if I had thought of that 60 years ago, who knows where I would be now. But I have to say, one of the things that I find attractive about, and this is very much in later life, most of my priesthood I've had a Jesuit spiritual director, or a Jesuit trained spiritual director. But I really became acquainted with Jesuit spirituality, I would say, in less than the last 10 years, maybe even just the last 5 years. That has really begun to speak to me. It's very interesting. At the same time, for me, this Franciscan spirituality has spoken very deeply to me. The two of them together, and they're not opposed to each other, they're not contradictory, they are in perfect harmony. And in fact, if you look at the life of Francis and the life of Ignatius 300 years later, you find a remarkable parallels in their own story, their own journey, their own spiritual experience. That's something for another time, however. But the second thing that he points out about the Jesuits is, you get community. He needs community. He can't be a lone ranger, which is, of course, why he didn't live in the papal apartments. He chose to live in the same guest house where he lived as a cardinal during the conclave. He switched rooms. He just basically moved down the hall. But the reason why, he said, I can't live in isolation. I have to be with people. I have to be in community. And we see that all over the place in whatever news reports there are that come out. You can find videos of him like going into the Vatican workers' canteen. He did that a couple of weeks ago and stood in the cafeteria line and I think had some baked fish, I believe. That sort of thing. He eats his meals there regularly in the Casa Santa Marta. Some cynics will say that's one way he can be sure that they're not poisoning him. If you eat what everyone else is eating, well, oh, would you like a little of my pasta here? What exactly is in that Parmesan cheese? Anyway, but he chose the Jesuits because mission is so integral to the meaning of their community. They're not simply sent forth to do stuff, but rather they go together to live among people in a way that demonstrates, brings the life of Jesus Christ to them. For a Jesuit to be the Bishop of Rome, he really concentrates on discernment. And again, that is taking an attitude of first listening to the Lord. Listening to the Lord anew. Not trying simply to develop and rehash the same old, but listening anew. And he certainly is getting the reputation of being the Pope who listens, and who listens before he speaks. And I think for leadership, that is one of the prime lessons that we can learn also. Another element of Jesuit spirituality, hand in hand with this, is the relationship of what I would like to call the macro and the micro. Did anybody ever see that old movie that's been parodied a number of times and I think has gone through a couple of revisions called Powers of 10? Anybody familiar with Powers of 10? Google it. It's a fantastic little 3 or 4 minute journey that starts with a family lying on a beach towel at the shores of Lake Michigan, and then it pulls back by power of 10 and keeps going to the edges of the known universe. How many? 17 billion light years away? And then it goes back to the same thing and goes closer by powers of 10. And in other words, each segment is 10 times enlarged from the previous one, until, quicker than you realize, you get down to the vast spaces in between the subatomic particles. I mean, it just, it blows your mind. All within the space of about, 3 minutes. Well, that demonstrates to us, I think, that, the macro, the big, and the little really are united, are related. You can't separate the two. And of course, his insight, and one of the insights of St. Ignatius, is Jesus, the incarnation, is that union of the macro, God, and the micro, humanity. Not just to come down and become somebody like us, but to take on the very, as I often will say in a homily, take on the very depths of what we are. Take on even our sinfulness. Even if he is without sin. Here's an interesting insight that you just may want to revisit and come back to. Sin is not a quality of being human. Sin is a defect in being human. Sin is like a bite out of an apple. The apple is made less with the bite out of it. Now, Jesus takes on the apple, but takes on the full condition of the apple as a whole one, but nonetheless identifies with the sinfulness, not just the effects of sin, but really the pain of sin, the humiliation, and what is the ultimate result of sin? Death. Which we experience death as annihilation. You can't get much smaller than that. We experience death as annihilation. The dead person, as far as we can tell, is no more. Jesus affirms that that experience is not true. That the gift of God is to fulfill what he has created, not to annihilate it. And that is the meaning of the resurrection. So, Francis has this sense of relating in his own person something of that big and little. It's amazing to me how in some of the videos that I've seen, and one of them was that prayer service that he had in the Vatican with Shimon Peres and Abbas. How comfortable he is in the presence of important and powerful people. How comfortable and unaffected he is. And also how comfortable he is, attentive when he is going through the crowds in his Pope mobile, attentive to somebody who needs his embrace. Stops, gets down, and embraces and kisses. The sick child, the deformed person, the person who is in some way visibly in need. He's equally comfortable at all ends of the spectrum. I think that's a great lesson from by example. The next thing under the Society of Jesus is, it says it's an institution in tension, but not centered in oneself, but rather centered always in the person of Jesus Christ. And therefore, in his church, which is the extension of Christ. The focus of that, therefore, as we said early on in the beginning, when we are dealing with sin and our own sin, we don't let ourselves be caught up in the lack, in shame, in guilt. We don't concentrate on sin. We concentrate on how and where God is working. If you're at my Mass last Sunday, I spoke a little bit about, it's another Jesuit practice, the examen of consciousness, which is not the examination of conscience that we're all familiar with, where we dredge up our sins and try to deal with our sins specifically. But what he says is, concentrate on the center. Concentrate on what God is doing in your life. And that will take care of sin. Concentrate on what God is doing. And so the Jesuit method really is daily. At least once, maybe twice. Take some time and just ask the Lord to help you to see how he is working in your life. Where is he working? What is he doing? That is a prayer that I think infallibly will be answered. Page 4 gets into church government. There's some stuff about leadership there, but I think this is a natural breaking point. So let's kind of see if we can spend 2 minutes in silent prayer and then a few minutes of sharing. This might be a good time silently if you need to visit the restroom to go ahead and do so. Or to stretch.